Okay, so everything is ready. So the first thing we usually do is we import libraries we need. So we are going to import the libraries we need. So we are going to have pandas, numpy. Okay, so for today we're just going to use pandas and numpy. And for the data, we are going to make our own sample data. Then from that, I'm going to show you some few things that we need to do with that data. Okay, so let's begin. So I'm going to create my sample data, and you can follow through also. And this data will have some columns. So I'm going to have my data being equal to, let's say, something like company. So we are going to have company such as Google, Microsoft, Facebook. Okay. Then apart from that, we are going to have what else? So maybe we are going to have the average salary. So that's the average salary in this company. And then maybe lastly, what we are going to have is something like that, the standard deviation. Then we are going to convert this to a data frame. So we are going to have df being equal to pd dot data frame. Then we convert the data. So let me share this in the chat section. Then you can follow through. Yeah, so I'll give you 5 minutes to copy what I've done, then we can proceed. Then I'll explain some of the few things we usually do when it comes to data pre-processing. Okay, so I was to list some of the things we can do here. And the first thing we can do is the encoding. And what does encoding do? So we convert categorical columns to be numeric. So that's basically what we do here. Then the next thing we can do is normalization. So we scale the data to be between 0 and 1. And why do we usually scale this data to be between 0 and 1? So the reason as to why we are doing this is for us to have a narrow range for fitting our model, so that when we are fitting the model, we won't be having large range of values. So we'll be having values ranging from 0 to 1 in each and every case we are having. So basically, those are the two things we usually do. And some of the other stuff you can do is check for missing values and also check for outliers, and lastly check for duplicates, because you don't need duplicates when fitting ML models. So these are the checks that we usually do. So first of all, we have to eliminate any duplicates. We have to check if we have any outliers that we can get rid of. And again, we have to check if our data has missing values. And also we need to come up with ways of which we can eliminate these missing values, or how we can replace these missing values. So basically that's it. So hope you are done copying this code part so that we can proceed. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check my data frame. So this is my data frame. So we have here column number 1, and column number 1 is the company column. Column number 2 is the average column, and column number 3 is the STD column. So the first thing we can do here is we can encode these categorical columns. So yeah, we know we have our data there. So if I type in something like df.info, what am I going to get? So here you can see column 0, which is the company column, is an object. Column 1, the average column, is an integer. Column 2, the standard deviation column, is an integer also. So this means that I'll have to encode this column to be numeric also. And one of the ways we can do that is by using the map function. But we won't do that for today. So today I'll not be using the map function. So what I'll do is I'll follow a different approach. So I'll show you ways in which we usually do this, and that is using the pandas library and maybe the sklearn library. Okay, so let's do that. So here I'll start the encoding part. And for encoding, we will use the pandas get dummies method. And we have sklearn label encoder, sklearn one hot encoder, and sklearn ordinal encoder. So those are the 4 ways in which we can encode our data set. So we will have to use some of them. Okay, so yeah, let's proceed. So we will start with the pandas get dummies method, and you'll get to see how the pandas get dummies method works. So here we have, if I type in df.head, so these are just the notes. So for the code part, I'll let you copy the code parts as we proceed. So this part here is we will start with the pandas get dummies method. And before we proceed, I need to show you something. So maybe I can illustrate what we are going to do when it comes to working with pandas get dummies. So I'm going to create a new drawing. So hope my pen is okay and can work. And here what I'll do is I'll create a new drawing for you guys. So let's say we have this data set here, and we have values x, y, and z. So this is column, let's say column I. So for column I, if we are going to like do any encoding, then this would be my output, okay? So I will create something known as xi, something known as yi, and something else known as zi. So those will be my 3 new columns that I will have created. So this is the encoding part. Then here we will have 3 rows. So anywhere where x appears, then we will have a 1 there. And anywhere where we don't have an x, then we will replace that with zeros. So here we will have 1, 0, 0. Then here we don't have a y, then so that will be a 0. Here we have a y, so this will be a 1. Then this will be a 0. Then this will be a 0, 0, 1. So this is how the PD get dummies method works. So this is the PD get dummies method. And also this is how the sklearn one hot encoder works. So if we were dealing with the label encoder and the ordinal encoder, then this is what will happen. So we will come up with a single column here. Then what will happen is we will have our original column y there, but then our x, so this is our x will be equal to 1. Our y will be equal to 2. Then our z will be equal to 3. And this might change to be something like 0, 1, 2 instead. So what I'm extending here is just another example. So these parts here are just an example of how I would expect this to appear in other situations. Okay. So as I've mentioned, this is for label encoder and the ordinal encoder. So for these two, we don't create any additional columns, but for these two, we create additional columns. So let's go back to our code and have an illustration of this. Yeah, so we will start with the pandas get dummies method. And here we have one categorical column, which is the company column. So what we usually do is we first type in pd.get underscore dummies. Then we specify our data frame. So our data frame is DF. Then we specify the company. So not the company, but we specify the column name. So in this case, our column name is the company column. Okay. Then prefix. So we've mentioned here in our illustration that we will have xi, yi, zi. So the prefix is basically what the name that's going to be given to this column. So we'll get to see how it works. And if we run this is what we get. So you can see we've got the average column, we've got the STD column, we've got the company FB, company Google, and the company Microsoft columns here. So basically what you need to know is, first of all, we'll get these Boolean outputs here. So in a case where we have company Google, we have true, true. In a case where we have other companies, we get the false. Okay. So what do these true and false values represent? So these true and false values represent the ones and zeros that I've drawn here. Okay. Because if we say something like true is equal to 1, let's confirm if that's true. Okay, just a minute. True being equal to 1. So you can see true is actually equal to 1. And that's the reason as to why I was saying that true is a representation of the one that we have here. And let's say what false is equivalent to. So is false equivalent to 0? So you can see false is equivalent to 0. So basically that's the representation that we are getting here. So we are getting zeros and ones, but in terms of false or true, the Boolean values. So you can copy this code and then we can proceed on and discuss the other methods. Okay, let me increase the code font size, but I guess I've zoomed in much. So that's the code. You can copy it and then we can proceed. Yes, Brenda, any questions?
Yes. For
Yes,
me, I feel I've not understood.
you've not understood this part.
Yes.
Okay,
And
so
even how we are applying it.
what I said is when we were starting the course, so when we are dealing with categorical variables, so for this PD get dummies method, or let's say, let me start from the beginning. So when we are fitting machine learning models, one thing you need to note is when fitting these models, you can't fit them while you have these categorical variables. So what you need to do is you need to convert those categorical variables to be numeric. So for example, if I checked the info for these, what we've created here. So you can see we have booleans, and booleans I've shown you that, for example, here, true is equivalent to 1 and false is equivalent to 0. So what we are basically doing here is we are converting these values to be numeric so that when we are fitting our model, we won't be getting any errors because machine learning models don't work with numeric don't work with categorical values, so these object values. So they only work with numeric values. So this is just one of the examples. So maybe I can go to the second example and you'll get to understand why I am doing this. So the reason as to why I'm doing this is to convert these values. So for example, Google, we know that these are strings, but we want them represented in terms of numbers. So for example, we can have Google being a 1, Microsoft being a 2, and FB being a 3, so something like that. So this is the PD get dummies method. So you can copy that code, then we can proceed on to label encoder, and then I'll explain further from there. Okay, so I guess you might be done with this. So let's move on to the next part. So I'll delete this part for true and false, and then we can discuss the label encoder part. Or let's go to the ordinal encoding first. So for ordinal encoding, so what you do first of all is you run this importation. So from sklearn dot pre-processing import ordinal encoder. So just like we fit machine learning models, so the first thing you need to do is you need to instantiate the encoder, okay? And here you will have encoder being equal to ordinal encoder. Okay. Then after that, you fit and transform. You fit and transform the data. So when running pre-processing models, you fit and transform the data. When you are running predictive models, you fit and predict. So those are the two differences you need to note. So when we are running prediction models, we fit and predict. When we are running pre-processing models, we fit and transform. Yeah, so that's basically what we have. So here we will have encoder dot fit transform. Then we transform the company column. So we only select the company column. So then after that, we output the transformed data frame. So let's see what we get. So here you can see, for example, we get arrays 1, 2, and 0. For Google has been given array 1, Microsoft has been given array 2. So these are numbers, so don't confuse them to be anything else. So Google has been matched with 1, Microsoft has been matched with 2, and FB has been matched with 0. So for example, if I check the original DF, so maybe I can say something like so yeah, I can say DF. I can say DF company encoded should be equal to encoder.fit transform. Then we transform that column. So I'll have to delete that. And then we can run this and then we can check our DF. So here you can see what happens. So we have company encoded, where we have Google, we have the values 1, 1. Where we have the company Microsoft, we have the values 2 and 2. Where we have the company Facebook, we have 0 and 0. So basically that's what ordinal encoder does. So what I will suggest is, when working with encoding, so the fastest way in which you can encode your data is by using ordinal encoder. So I will suggest you use ordinal encoder as opposed to pd.getDummies, because pd.getDummies will create additional columns to your data, while the ordinal encoder will just create a new column with the values encoded with different numbers. So this is basically what happens when you are encoding your data. So you are basically converting categorical columns, or maybe let's say strings, to be numeric. So any questions from you, Brenda? Do you understand what encoding does?
Yes, I have understood.
Yeah. Any questions? Okay, so if you guys don't have any questions, then I'll leave an assignment for you. So what I want you to do is, I want you to try out one hot encoding and see how it works. So try out one hot encoding and also try out label encoding. So those are two additional encoding methods, but the procedure is same. So you'll just have to import the model here. So for example, if it's one hot encoder, what you can do is you can type in from sklearn dot preprocessing import label encoder from sklearn dot preprocessing import one hot encoder. So all preprocessing libraries are here. Yeah, so that's basically all what you need to do. Then let's discuss. So this is just some bits of theory on this part for normalization. So normalization will do that later and not today. So let's discuss the part for missing values and part for outliers. So, and duplicates. So when checking for missing values, I believe you all know how you can check if your data has missing values. So what we usually run is we usually run this code. So we type in df.isNA.sum. So that's how we check for missing values. And the next thing we do is to check for duplicates. So is we run df.duplicated.sum. So what if we have missing values? So how do we drop missing values? So we drop them by typing df.dropNA, then in place being equal to true, meaning that we are replacing those missing values permanently. So something like that. Okay. Then the next thing we do is checking for outliers. So for outliers, my code here might be complicated, but what you usually do is you create a box plot. Okay. And from that box plot, you can get to see if your data has outliers or not. So maybe we can go to Google and have a look. So let's check the box plot part. So this is how a box plot is interpreted. So here you can see we have the lower quartile, we have the median, we have the upper quartile, we have the max and the minimum value. So any value that is below the minimum value or above the maximum value is considered to be an outlier. So if you create a box plot and you get to note something like that, then you'll get to know that that column has outliers. So for example, if we check this plot here, you can see experiment number 3 has outliers for the true speed because we have two values that are above the maximum value and two values that are below the maximum value. So those are some of the things you need to know. So I've mentioned that we are going to discuss these three things orally. So hope you've understood how we work with them. So once you've checked for duplicates, you can drop them. So you just have to type in df.drop underscore duplicates, then in place should be equal to true. Yeah, so that should be all for today, not unless you have questions concerning what we've discussed. So the main thing I wanted to show you was this encoding part. So how do you convert the categorical columns to be numeric so that you can go ahead and fit your ML models? So this only applies to the features column, but when it comes to the target column, it's not a must you encode it because you will simply be fitting a classification model. And for classification models, the target column can remain as it is. Yeah, so that's all for now, not unless you guys have questions. So as you are sharing your questions, I can upload today's class recording. So let me go ahead and do that.